For the night is dark and full of terrors. In the ancient books it's written that a warrior will draw a burning sword from the fire. And that sword shall be Lightbringer. Prophecies are dangerous things.
Hi everyone, it's Charlie. This is going to be my video explaining what's going on with Azor Ahai on the TV series, what they've changed from the books, because there are a couple retcons in the last couple of episodes with Arya Stark's character. There are a lot of you that are confused. Does this mean that she's Azor Ahai now? So I'll try to explain what's going on. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the Game of Thrones videos. There's a new round of the HBO Now giveaway too. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment on the video. Obviously, careful for spoilers through Season 8, Episode 3 if you have not seen the episode yet, because we'll be talking about what happened at the end of it. After the episode, a lot of people were wondering if Arya Stark is now supposed to be the real Azor Ahai, per the show's explainer, because she's the person that landed the killing blow on the Night King. So then what does it mean that Melisandre has been talking about the prince who was promised Azor Ahai this whole time ever since she debuted during Season 2? Then even if you haven't read the books, they use Season 7 Episode 2 to introduce the concept that High Valyrian is a gender-neutral language, so it could also be interpreted as the princess who was promised will be the one who will bring the dawn. There are a couple different concepts tied up in this prophecy. There's Azor Ahai and the prince, or now princess who was promised, but those are really the same thing, pulling from the exact same prophecy. It's just that in the series and in the books, Melisandre tends to use the term Azor Ahai more often than not, whereas other characters like Maester Aemon in the books and Rhaegar Targaryen use the prince who was promised when talking about the prophecy. The text of the prophecy that Melisandre keeps quoting from just reads, "There will come a day after a long summer when the star bleeds and the cold breath of darkness falls heavy on the world. In this dread hour a warrior shall draw from the fire a burning sword, and that sword shall be Lightbringer, the red sword of heroes, and he who clasps it shall be Azor Ahai, come again, and the darkness shall flee before him." We kind of got a version of that at the beginning of Season 2 with Stannis, because at that time she thought that Stannis was the fulfillment of the prophecy. She'd been seeing visions in the flames, but as we learned later in the series, her ability works a lot like Bran Stark's ability, where she's getting all this information, but she doesn't necessarily know how to contextualize it, so her visions are now starting to come true at the end of the series. It's just that early in the game, she didn't know exactly when these things were going to happen. Like when Stannis was getting ready for the Battle of Winterfell and Melisandre burned Shireen because she was convinced that that was the battle that she had been seeing in her visions. He would be victorious, the prince who was promised. As we later learned, that was false. The battle that she had been seeing this whole time in the flames was this battle of Winterfell against the Night King and the White Walkers. So when you think about Melisandre's visions early in the series and how she was wrong later, just think about her the same way you think about Bran, like just has all this information, doesn't know quite what to make of it, has trouble contextualizing it and placing it in the timeline. So Azor Ahai is just one of many prophecies in the books. George R. R. Martin is much bigger about seeding in prophecies into the narrative than the TV show has been. So the TV show has cut out a whole bunch of stuff. Like you talk about Maggie the Frog, the prophecy of the Valonqar, the TV show completely cut that out. So when we're talking about the TV show paying off big prophecies, you really just have to think about the prophecies that they've literally said out loud. So Azor Ahai just happens to be one of the few that they've actually talked about on the series. If you remember Season 7, Episode 2, like that added wrinkle, oh, it could actually be the princess who was promised, maybe Daenerys is the fulfillment of the prophecy with Jon Snow, because Melisandre senses that Jon is very important in the War for the Dawn. She just doesn't know exactly what he's supposed to do, and because of what happened with Shireen, she's learned to be more cautious about the way she interprets her visions in the flames. Like she says, prophecy is a tricky thing, and kind of shakes her head a little bit, like, don't hold me hard and fast to this. I'm not telling you exactly what needs to happen. I'm just telling you that you and Jon Snow are both very important to this prophecy. In the books, that's probably going to be a Winds of Winter type moment, but the way they're seeing it is actually through Maester Aemon's character. Maester Aemon in the books is also thinking about the prophecy of the prince who was promised. He believes in it the way that Rhaegar believes in it. He corresponded with him regularly. Based on what the books tell us, Rhaegar was obsessed with prophecy. Daenerys even has a vision of him quoting the prince who was promised, when at the time, Rhaegar actually thought that it was his son with Elia Martell named Aegon Targaryen. The reason why Rhaegar thought that this Aegon, the son of Elia Martell, was the fulfillment of the prophecy is because he was born as a red comet was over King's Landing. So the whole idea is that the comet is very important to this Azor Ahai figure. So just remember when that was happening on the TV show. That was near the time when Daenerys' dragons were hatched. So she was reborn amidst salt and smoke. Also, Jon Snow was at the Fist of the First Men with the wildlings, learning about the threat of the White Walkers while that was happening. But early on, the books and the TV show are trying to tell you that there's no one specific interpretation, no one specific person who is actually going to be Azor Ahai. It's probably going to be a number of people working together. George R. R. Martin has talked a lot about his original main characters before he changed his story. Like I said, Arya Stark, very important to his original endgame. He originally intended to age the characters up with a huge time jump during the series, whereas what ended up happening is that got canceled, so Arya Stark kind of got parked in Braavos to learn to become this crazy assassin as part of the Faceless Men in the House of Black and White. Not just to make her a really badass face-stealing assassin, obviously it was very important for Endgame that she have a lot of these skills. So even though the TV show has changed a lot of things, and it's even retconned itself with a couple of the Arya Stark moments during season 3, which I'll explain in a second, there are a couple moments that happen, a couple lines of dialogue that Melisandre quotes, which are actually retcons to what she said earlier on the series. One of the other big changes from the books is that there is no official Night King as of yet in the books. George R. R. Martin has talked about a mythical Night's King, plural Night's King, who was the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, a Stark of Winterfell who fell in love with this Ice Bride and was turned into what seems like a White Walker and turned on the Brothers of the Night's Watch, who then had to band together with the king beyond the wall at the time of the Wildlings to defeat them and put them back down. That was after the mythical long night that people talk about, the never-ending night that lasted for a generation, which was about 8,000 years ago in the books. More recently, he's been saying it's closer to 4,000 or 5,000 years just because there's no real recorded history from that period. The Maesters didn't exist. The Citadel wasn't a big thing till much, much later. So like during season 8, episode 2, they talk about how the Night King is trying to eliminate memory of man. How do you keep people from forgetting things? You write it down. That's what the Maesters are all about. So George R. R. Martin is just saying that it's important not to take things too literally when people are talking about legends of the Long Night and things that happened during then, because a lot of the actual facts could have been twisted over time. And a lot of that gets into the idea of this Azor Ahai figure, the person who will bring the dawn. So here's Lomas Longstrider, who wrote a book within the context of A Song of Ice and Fire called Wonders Made by Man. He talks about meeting descendants of the Rhoynar in the ruins of the festival city of Croyan, who have tales of a darkness that made the Rhoyne dwindle and disappear, her waters frozen as far south as the joining of the Selhoru. It goes on to say, according to these tales, the return of the sun only came when a hero convinced the Mother Rhoyne's many children, lesser gods such as the Crab King and the Old Man of the River, to put aside their bickering and join together to sing a secret song that brought back the day. That sounds very similar to the legends about the Children of the Forest coming together with the First Men to defeat the Night King and the White Walkers, which we actually know are a real thing. Melisandre comes from Ahai, so no surprise that the legend of Azor Ahai comes from that city. So when she's talking about Stannis and then Jon Snow, she's talking about Azor Ahai come again. She's talking about this mythical figure that came from that part of the world, not someone who necessarily originated in Westeros, which is where the mythical Long Night that we keep talking about happened. There's another tale from something called the Jade Compendium, a book within A Song of Ice and Fire, that recounts a legend from E.T., which is sort of an analog for China within A Song of Ice and Fire, which states that the sun, quote-unquote, hid its face from the earth for a lifetime, ashamed at something none could discover, and that disaster was averted only by the deeds of a woman with a monkey's tail. That all comes from George R. R. Martin in the books, so he's just trying to seed the idea that prophecy, as Melisandre on the TV show says, is a tricky thing. What it seems like is that you have a lot of different cultures banding together, putting aside their differences to overcome this big insurmountable threat. So the whole idea of Azor Ahai is tied up in a bunch of important people coming together to, say, defeat the White Walkers and the Night King. Or if the Night King doesn't exist in the book, then just the White Walkers. And on top of that, too, the mythical figure Azor Ahai that's talked about in these legends is also referred to as, quote-unquote, the last hero. Legends in the North also state that this mythical last hero figure and his companions went in search of the Children of the Forest during the Long Night, thousands of years ago. They survived attacks by giants, whites, and the White Walkers. Eventually, they reached the Children of the Forest, gained their assistance. They formed the Night's Watch, and then they had the Battle for the Dawn. That ended the Long Night. So the path of the last hero sounds a lot like what Bran Stark did going north of the Wall, seeking out the Children of the Forest and the Three-Eyed Raven, seeking to renew their alliance. Jon Snow also did similar things. Arya Stark traveled all over the world, gaining all these skills in what she thought was to become a faceless person. Jaqen H'ghar always implied that he knew a little bit more about the path she was destined for than he let on. So just more evidence of Martin being purposefully ambiguous about who this one figure was, applying it to a bunch of different characters in present day, trying to let you know that it's no real one person that's doing all this by themselves. We still don't quite know if Martin is ever going to introduce a Night King-like figure. That is an original creation of the TV show, but it was introduced as an idea when George R. R. Martin was still writing Game of Thrones episodes, so it's something that he signed off on. I think the idea of a lot of these main characters like Jon Snow, Daenerys, Arya Stark, and some of the others being the fulfillment of the prophecy together collectively works better if you have numerous threats that you have to take down all these White Walkers instead of just one main White Walker. So some of the changes that the TV show has made are incongruous with what Martin's trying to seed in the books. So it's kind of messing with people's heads when it comes to predicting who is Azor Ahai. Like, are you trying to tell me it's this one figure, Jon Snow, this whole time? Oh, now you're trying to tell me it's both Jon Snow and Daenerys together? Then why is Arya Stark technically the person to kill the Night King? Because if it's got to be a prince or princess who was promised, how is Arya Stark a princess? Even though Robb Stark was briefly the king in the north, she's his sister, so maybe that would make her a princess and that would kind of fulfill that part of the prophecy. But how does it work? Does their special blood exist even if they were only king for a brief period? The whole idea is that Martin is trying to say, don't put too much faith in the letter of those prophecies. It's more about a broad interpretation of what it really means, them coming together to defeat this threat as a collective group. The thing that the TV show has done, which sort of misleads you along the way, is try to seed in clues like born under a star, where you see Jon Snow being born in this bed where you have the star of Arthur Dayne's sword Dawn above the bed. Here's where the TV show gets really tricky, and it gives you an idea that they didn't completely know what the ending was going to be when they seeded some of these earlier Easter eggs, so you can't necessarily say that they had this plan the whole time. During the episode, Melisandre gives Arya Stark that pep talk and reminds her about the prophecy that she gave her earlier on the series. You said that we would meet again. I saw darkness in you, and in that darkness, eyes staring back at me, brown eyes, green eyes, blue eyes you'll shut forever. So what happens is in this moment, they wanted Melisandre to give Arya the idea or remind her, oh, blue eyes like the Night King, I should go kill him now. But the problem with this moment is that it's actually a retcon to what the actual prophecy she gave her during season 3 was. So during season 3, episode 6, she says, I see a darkness in you, and in that darkness, eyes staring back at me, brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes shall shut forever. So the order of the colors of eyes she would shut was different. Here's the other big change they made too. They said that they decided that Arya would be the person to kill the Night King about 3 years ago, which is when they were getting ready to write season 7. So during season 7, that's why you saw Samwell look at a dagger in a book that looked exactly like Arya's dagger. They wanted to see the idea that the dagger would be important for defeating the Night King, so that's why Bran put it in her hands. He sensed because of his green sight that the dagger would be important and she was the person to have it. He didn't know exactly when it would be important, just that it would be important for Arya to have the dagger. But like I said, they retconned the moment for Arya when she was getting ready to go kill the Night King. So during season 3, when they originally seeded that prophecy, which actually is not from the books, that's a moment that the TV show made up, they did not know that Arya Stark would be the person to kill the Night King. So when she gave her the prophecy for the first time, that actually on the TV show just referred to her stealing faces, all the people she'd be killing. She killed Walder Frey. We talk about Arya shutting green eyes. Cersei has emerald eyes in the books. Lena Headey has green eyes in real life. So keep in mind that while the TV show is trying to wrap up the fulfillment of a lot of things that it's been setting up, they will also probably retcon some other moments from earlier in the series and from the books so that it all just seems to fit together by the end. So just because Arya Stark kills the Night King in this moment doesn't mean that she is Azor Ahai. So given all that, I think the best answer to who Azor Ahai really is actually Jon Snow, Daenerys, and Arya Stark together. You could argue that Jaime Lannister, other characters have a role in helping them along the way, but I still think that it's mostly about Jon Snow coming together with Daenerys and Arya Stark being the person with the skills to land some of these killing blows. But when it comes to this moment in the books, I do think the actual battle with the White Walkers will go down very differently. So we'll just have to check back after Winds of Winter comes out to see if it goes down that, because the final book, Dream of Spring, is supposed to be about what happens after you defeat that threat. Like, the realm turn on itself? Will they put aside their differences? Will old enmities rise back up? That's why you see them defeating the Night King in episode 3, because the rest of the story, the Dream of Spring of it all, is going to be what happens after the next couple of episodes. So hopefully that explains a little bit about the mythology behind this and some of the changes that the TV show made. Interesting to note about some of the retcons too. I might do another Game of Thrones bonus video before episode 4 happens, but my episode 4 video will post Sunday night just like normal. As long as you have alerts enabled for my channel, you'll see the videos when I post them, no worries. While you wait for everything, click here for my Season 8 Episode 4 trailer video, and click here for my Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 3 video. Thank you so much for watching. Everybody stay awesome. I'll see you guys tonight.